What would you do if your parents bought a brand new Tesla with your money? I came home one day and saw a Tesla sitting in our driveway. A sleek, brand new model, shining under the afternoon sun like a trophy. My parents were beaming with pride, standing next to it as if they had won the lottery. At first, I thought maybe they had. Or maybe my father had finally landed a high-paying job after years of jumping from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. But then I asked the question, the one that made my stomach twist even before I heard the answer. How did you afford this? And when they responded, my heart dropped. Because the answer was me. I grew up in a household where family loyalty was just another word for financial slavery. My parents drilled it into my head that children owed their parents everything. Money, time, obedience. Our entire lives belonged to them because they had given us life. I was the eldest of three. My two younger brothers, Ryan and Caleb, were the golden boys. They were loved, spoiled, protected. Meanwhile, I was raised to be useful. I cooked. I cleaned. I looked after my brothers. I learned early that in our household, sons were blessings, but daughters were investments. By the time I was 15, I was already working part-time jobs while juggling school, just to have a tiny bit of independence. And when I got a full-ride scholarship to a university out of state, I thought I was finally free. I was so wrong, because even after I left, even after I built a life of my own, I was still just their personal ATM. And nothing proved that more than the Tesla sitting in our driveway that day. This is a true story from r/true off my chest, a place where people share their deepest, most painful truths. And this is my story, Sophia Morgan. If you enjoy real-life stories filled with emotions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for the latest videos from Reddit True Vault. I think I always knew, deep down. From the moment I was old enough to understand the dynamics in my house, I knew I wasn't loved the same way as my brothers. Lucas and Caleb were the golden boys, the heirs, the sons my parents had always wanted. And me? I was just their sister, an afterthought, an inconvenience. It wasn't like my parents hated me. No, that would have required too much emotion. They simply didn't care. Unless, of course, they needed something. The lessons started early. By the time I was 8, I was doing chores that Lucas and Caleb never had to lift a finger for. Washing dishes, folding laundry, sweeping the floors. At first, I thought maybe it was just because I was the oldest. That's how it worked, right? Then came the punishments. Whenever Lucas or Caleb broke something, I was the one who got yelled at. If they misbehaved in public, I was the one dragged home early. If they got bad grades, I was the one scolded for not helping them study. By the time I turned 13, my parents' expectations had shifted again. Now, it wasn't just chores and responsibility. Now it was money. Family helps each other, Sophia. That's just how it is. We raised you. So now it's your turn to take care of us. You wouldn't have anything without us. Remember that. I was barely a teenager when they made it clear my financial future wasn't mine. It was theirs. At 15, I thought I had finally gotten out. I earned a scholarship to a prestigious boarding school. For the first time in my life, I had a chance to be independent. To be me, not just Lucas and Caleb's sister, or the daughter who was supposed to take care of everything. But my parents? They saw it as an investment. They didn't congratulate me for my hard work. They didn't feel proud. They just saw another opportunity. Good. Now you don't cost us anything anymore. That was what my dad actually said. Not, we're proud of you. Not, we'll miss you. Just relief that I was no longer a financial burden. Except, of course, I wasn't free. I thought leaving home would feel like freedom, but it didn't. I remember that first night at the dorm, lying in a stiff bed with a scratchy blanket, listening to the quiet murmurs of my new roommates. Some of them were homesick, whispering to their parents on the phone. Others were excitedly planning their weekends, talking about skiing trips or shopping sprees. And me? I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering if my mom or dad would call. They didn't. Instead, the first message I got from my mom was a Venmo request. Send money for groceries. $200. No, how are you? No, do you like your new school? Just money. That was all I was to them. Boarding school wasn't easy. While my classmates wore designer clothes and drove cars their parents bought them, I worked at the student cafeteria just to afford textbooks. I woke up before dawn to clean tables and serve breakfast before my first class. At night, while everyone else was socializing, I scrubbed dishes in the back. And still, my mom expected me to send money home. At 16, I got my first real paycheck. I should have been proud of myself. Instead, I felt nauseous. Because I already knew where most of it was going. It's just to help with the bills, honey. It's not like you need much at school, right? And I I listened, because that's what a good daughter does. I kept sending money, month after month. My entire college experience was the same. I worked part-time jobs, scrimped and saved, while my mother had a credit card under my name, using it whenever she wanted. Lucas and Caleb never had to give a dime. Not once. They were still the golden sons. And me? I was their personal bank. And the worst part? I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought that maybe, if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, they would finally love me. But I was wrong. And I wouldn't realize how wrong I was until the day I came home and found a brand new Tesla sitting in the driveway. And that was the moment everything changed. Coming home should feel comforting. It should be the place where you walk in, drop your bags, and let out a relieved sigh. But for me, coming home always felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that day. I pulled up to my parents' house after a long day at work, my old car wheezing like it was about to give up on life. And then I saw it, a brand new Tesla gleaming in the driveway. At first, I thought it had to belong to someone else. Maybe a guest. Maybe a friend had come over and parked in front of the house. Because there was no way my parents, who constantly cried about bills and demanded I send them money, could afford a car like that. But as I got out of my car, my mother stepped outside, grinning from ear to ear. My father followed behind, his chest puffed up with pride. They stood next to the Tesla like they had just won the lottery. I hesitated before asking the obvious question. How did they afford this? For a brief second, my mother's face twitched, just a tiny flicker of something. Guilt? Panic? It was gone as fast as it appeared, replaced with feigned excitement. She waved a hand dismissively, acting as if my question didn't matter. Can't you just be happy for us? My stomach twisted. That wasn't an answer. I pressed further, my voice sharper this time. The moment I asked how they paid for it, my father's expression darkened. His grin faded, replaced by something harsher. His gaze locked onto me, eyes narrowing. There was no celebration anymore. Just discomfort. Just tension. I knew this feeling all too well, the warning signs before a fight. You're always so ungrateful. His voice boomed in my head. We raised you, sacrificed for you, and now we finally get something nice. And you're acting like this? But I wasn't backing down. I knew them too well. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. The second I saw my account balance, my breath caught in my throat. Thousands of dollars gone. My heart pounded as I scrolled through my transaction history. But it wasn't just the missing money, it was the loan statements under my name. The Tesla wasn't just theirs. It was mine. My credit score wrecked. My name on a lease I never signed. My hands trembled. My head spun. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But then, there it was. The Tesla lease agreement, with MY forged signature. I looked up at my parents, my mouth dry. They had stolen my identity. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the walls were closing in. I was their daughter, their eldest child. I had spent years sending them money, helping them out, making sure they never struggled. And yet, this was how they repaid me. This is illegal, the thought screamed in my mind. They committed fraud. They stole from me. I could barely get the words out. They had forged my signature. They had taken out a car loan in my name without my consent. Do they even understand what they've done? My mother scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was a child throwing a tantrum. I felt my hands clench into fists. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't overreacting. They had stolen from me. They had wrecked my finances. And my father? He didn't look guilty. He didn't look sorry. He looked angry, like I was the one in the wrong. The room felt suffocating. I tried to hold my ground, but my father stepped closer. His face twisted with fury. I had seen this look before. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was pissed that I had caught him. And then, before I could even register what was happening, his hand came down. A slap, full force. My face snapped to the side, a stinging heat spreading across my cheek. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, frozen, while my father's voice boomed in my ears. You are my daughter. That means your money is mine. You owe us. Everything you have is because of us. I felt my breath hitch, my skin burning where his hand had struck. But something inside me had shattered. I had spent my whole life trying to be a good daughter, trying to prove my worth, trying to believe that if I just gave enough, they would love me back. But this was what I got in return. Not love, not gratitude, not even basic human decency, just entitlement, just control, just manipulation. The reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. They had never seen me as a daughter. I was nothing more than a walking ATM, and I was done. I don't remember walking out of that house. I don't remember moving at all. 1 second, my father's hand struck my face, hard enough to send a sharp, ringing pain through my skull. And the next, I was outside, standing on the sidewalk like a stranger in my own life. The late afternoon sun was blinding, but I barely registered the warmth on my skin. My ears were still ringing. My cheek burned. My hands shook. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. My father had hit me, but somehow, that wasn't the part that hurt the most. It was everything else. The realization that they had stolen from me. That I had given my entire life to a family that had never, ever seen me as anything other than a resource. That I had been nothing more than an investment. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Then I felt hands on my shoulders. Firm, steady, urgent. Lucas, and behind him, Caleb, the golden boys. The sons my parents had cherished. The ones they had protected while I was left to fend for myself. For years, I had resented them for how easily love had been handed to them while I had to earn every scrap of affection. I had envied them for the way our parents looked at them, for the way they had been shielded from all the things I had endured. But in that moment, they didn't look like the golden boys. They didn't look like the favored ones. They looked just as lost as I was. My knees buckled, and before I could stop myself, I collapsed onto the curb. I barely felt the rough pavement beneath me. The weight of everything. Years of exhaustion, years of being used, years of pretending that if I just kept giving, if I just kept proving my worth, they would love me, came crashing down all at once. My breathing was ragged, uneven. My whole body trembled. I had always believed that if I sacrificed enough, they would see me, that if I gave them everything, they would finally love me back. I had been wrong. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force the burning in my throat to go away. I wasn't going to cry. I refused to cry over them. But then, Lucas sat down next to me, and I wasn't sure what broke me more. The fact that he was there, choosing to sit beside me, choosing to leave that house, choosing to be here instead of with them, or the look on his face, not cold, not distant, but angry. Angry for me. Caleb was pacing in front of us, his hands curled into fists at his sides. His usual cocky, laid-back attitude was gone. His jaw was tight, his whole body tense. I had never seen him like this. Then, finally, he spoke. His voice was raw, unsteady. They had stolen from him too. The money he had saved up from his part-time job, his college fund, the emergency cash he had put away, gone. Wiped clean before he had even gotten the chance to use it. Our mother had taken it all. I sucked in a sharp breath. My stomach twisted. My whole world tilted. It wasn't just me. It had never been just me. Lucas let out a sharp, bitter laugh. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief. His whole life, he had told himself that Dad was just strict, that Mom was just overwhelmed. He had made excuses. So many excuses. But standing here, looking at me, seeing me, he couldn't deny the truth anymore. Our parents weren't just harsh. They weren't just strict. They were parasites. And we had been their hosts. For a long time, none of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. Everything we had been raised to believe, asterisk asterisk, that family was everything, that we owed them our loyalty, that our worth was measured by how much we could give, asterisk asterisk, it was all a lie. I had spent years thinking that if I just worked hard enough, if I just sacrificed enough, they would love me. Lucas had spent years thinking that he was the lucky one, that he had avoided my fate. Caleb had spent years thinking that they wouldn't do to him what they had done to me. But we had all been fools, because the truth was painfully simple. They never loved us. Not in the way parents were supposed to love their children. Not unconditionally. Not at all. They only loved what we could give them. And when we stopped giving, they would discard us, just like they had discarded me. Lucas stood first. He wiped a hand down his face, his expression a mixture of rage, exhaustion, and something else, something sharper. Resolve. I had never seen that on his face before. Then, he turned to me, and I knew. He understood now. He finally understood. And for the first time in our lives, we were on the same side. Lucas exhaled slowly, then looked toward the house, the place that had never been a home. We make them regret it. I stared at him. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then, finally, I got to my feet. Caleb was right behind me. Because for the first time since we were children, we weren't alone. We were siblings. Not just people who had grown up under the same roof. Not just people who had been raised by the same two monsters. We were survivors of the same betrayal, and we were going to make them pay. I didn't storm back into that house. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just left. Lucas and Caleb followed, their faces still tight with anger, their bodies tense like they were trying to hold back an explosion. But I didn't say anything. I didn't tell them what I was planning, because I wasn't going to fight my parents. I was going to let them destroy themselves. For days, I stayed quiet. I didn't return their calls. I didn't respond to their messages. I let my father's slap burn into my memory as a reminder of exactly who they were. And while they thought I was licking my wounds, I was preparing their downfall. Lucas was the first to act. He snuck into the house when our parents weren't home, rifling through my father's desk until he found the proof. The car purchase agreement, the loan papers, the signature that wasn't mine but was supposed to be. He took pictures of everything. Then Caleb played his part. He casually asked Mom about how they got the Tesla, pretending to admire their success. And she couldn't resist bragging. She laughed as she told Caleb exactly how easy it was to forge my signature, how stupid banks were, how she and Dad had outsmarted the system. And Caleb, he recorded the entire thing. I didn't have to bait my parents into exposing themselves. They were going to do it for me. Because a few days later, my father made a big announcement. They were hosting a party, a huge one. They invited everyone, family, friends, neighbors, old co-workers, because they wanted to show off their brand new Tesla. My father needed people to admire him. He had spent his whole life crafting the image of a successful businessman, even when he was drowning in debt. And now, with the Tesla sitting in the driveway, he had proof of his success. They didn't just want people to see the car. They wanted admiration. They wanted validation. And they were about to get neither. I arrived late. By the time I stepped into the backyard, the party was in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of people believing the lie. My father stood near the Tesla, beaming as he soaked up the attention. "This is what happens when you make smart investments," he declared. "If you work hard and stay disciplined, you can achieve anything." People nodded approvingly. My mother nodded along like she hadn't stolen money from her own children. I took a slow breath. Then I stepped forward. Time to end the show. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and let Mom's voice fill the air. "No money? No problem. Just have a dumb kid who will sign anything for you." Silence. The laughter died. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. I walked forward, my heels clicking against the pavement, my heartbeat steady. Every single pair of eyes turned to me. My father's smile froze. My mother's face drained of color. "I wonder," I said, voice smooth as glass, "how many people here know that this car was bought with stolen money?" A ripple went through the crowd. I turned the phone around, displaying the contract. "My signature," I said, "is fake." The murmur rose into something louder. My father's expression cracked. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. I tilted my head. "You taught me something valuable, Dad," I said, my voice light. "A real man takes responsibility for his actions. Isn't that what you always said?" He opened his mouth, but someone else spoke first. "A neighbor, a family friend. You mean to tell me," she said, voice sharp, "that you didn't actually pay for this car?" I watched it happen in real time. The admiration? Gone. The respect? Evaporated. People backed away from my parents like they were contagious. Some looked disgusted. Some looked furious. Some just looked at them like they had never truly seen them before. And my father, who lived for appearances, lost control. He snapped. "You ungrateful little b***tch," he roared, stepping toward me. "That money is OURS. Everything you have is because of US." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I didn't flinch. I just let his words hang in the air, exposing everything about the man he really was. My mother broke down. She tried crying, tried playing the victim, but no one bought it. They had built their entire world on other people's opinions. And now, that world was gone. The party ended immediately. People left without saying goodbye. Hushed voices, shaken heads, judgmental glances. It was all there. The downfall they had created for themselves. And me? I walked away, not out of anger, not out of hatred, but because I was finally free. I didn't look back when I walked away from that party, but the damage I left behind, it spread like wildfire. Within hours, the whispers started. By morning, they had turned into full-blown rumors. By the end of the week, everyone knew. The Morgans weren't a successful, respectable family anymore. They were frauds, scammers, and the worst part? Nobody was surprised. People had always known my father had a tendency to exaggerate his successes. They had always suspected my mother lived beyond their means. But now, they had proof. Hushed conversations in grocery stores. Stares on the street. Awkward pauses when my parents entered a room. My father tried to deny it at first, but nobody believed him anymore. The neighbors who used to admire him? They avoided eye contact. The family friends who once respected him? They stopped returning calls. One by one, everyone disappeared. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but Lucas and Caleb were. Mom called them both constantly, sobbing into the phone. "We're your parents. You can't just leave us like this." Dad, on the other hand, was still in denial. He stormed into banks, demanding loans. But guess what happens when your credit is destroyed, your reputation is in shambles, and you've just been exposed as a liar? Nobody helps you. The Tesla was repossessed within a month. The car they were so desperate to have, gone. Their lifeline to maintaining appearances, gone. Their ability to manipulate and control us, gone. I had blocked them. I had erased them from my life. but they still had Lucas and Caleb, and they knew exactly how to manipulate them. Guilt. Your sister turned her back on us. Mom wailed. But you can still do the right thing. You're men, my father snapped. You have a responsibility to take care of your parents. Lucas and Caleb told me about the countless calls, the messages filled with guilt tripping, the desperate attempts to make them feel obligated. But something had changed. My brothers weren't blind anymore. They weren't trapped anymore. And for the first time, they saw our parents for who they really were. I was in our tiny apartment when Lucas called me. His voice was steady, but I could hear something raw beneath it. We're cutting them off, he said. I exhaled slowly. Are you sure? Yeah, he said. Then, after a pause, you were right about everything. I blinked back the sudden sting of tears. For so many years, I had been alone. I had thought my brothers were just like them, but they weren't. They had just been fooled, too. And now, they weren't fooled anymore. The last time Lucas spoke to my parents, he put them on speakerphone. I sat beside him. Caleb sat across from us. None of us said a word at first. The silence was thick. Then my father spoke first, his voice bitter. So this is it. You're choosing her over us. Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, Dad. I'm choosing myself. And me? Caleb added. And me. I whispered. There was a long pause. Then my mother lost it. You ungrateful little sh**ts. We raised you. We gave you everything. Everything. They had given us nothing but obligation. Nothing but guilt. And this time, it wasn't enough to keep us. We didn't celebrate. There was no grand victory, but there was peace. For the first time, we weren't bound to them anymore. We moved into a small apartment together, just the three of us. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. No manipulation, no lies, no debt hanging over our heads. Just three siblings, finally free. I stood in our tiny new kitchen, watching Lucas and Caleb argue about who got the last slice of pizza. It was so normal, so stupidly normal. And for the first time in my life, I realized this was family, not the one I was born into, not the one that raised me, but the one I had built. And as I sat down at the table with them, for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. The apartment wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't the kind of place our parents would have ever approved of. But for the first time in our lives, it felt like home. We sat on the floor, a few half-eaten pizza boxes between us, our laughter echoing in the small space. Lucas was teasing Caleb about something stupid. Caleb was pretending to be offended. I just watched them, not as the brothers I had once envied, not as the boys my parents had always favored over me, but as two people who had finally broken free, just like me. For so many years, I had thought I was alone, that I was the only one who saw the truth, that I was the only one they drained dry. But I wasn't. And now, we had each other. Lucas caught me staring and smirked. You good, Soph? I blinked, then smiled. Yeah, and I meant it, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for approval. I wasn't living for someone else. I wasn't desperate to be loved by people who were never capable of loving me. I was here, with them, and that was enough. Not everyone who brings you into this world deserves to be called family. True family isn't about blood, it's about love. And if someone only sees you as a bank account, it's time to walk away. This is a true story from our /true off my chest, shared by Sophia Morgan. If you enjoy real-life stories filled with emotions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for the latest videos from Reddit True Vault.